The storm rolled over the high plains with the rage of a wounded bull, tearing across the sky as the rancher, Cole Maddox, fought to keep his horse steady. He had seen storms, droughts, ambushes, and winters that froze even the toughest men, but nothing like this screaming wall of sand and ice smashing across the prairie. Through the swirling chaos, he caught sight of a figure stumbling toward the canyon rocks, hands out, body shaking like it would collapse any moment. He rode hard, leaning low against the wind until he reached her, young woman. Barely standing, her lips blue and her breath shallow. She was clutching her throat, unable to speak, choking on dust so thick her lungs were failing. When she saw him, desperation filled her eyes as she mouthed the only words she could force out between coughs. P put it. In my mouth, please. Cole didn't hesitate. He pulled the metal water flask from his coat and placed it against her trembling lips. She drank like someone who hadn't tasted water in days, but as soon as she swallowed, she collapsed against his chest, the weight of her fear and exhaustion nearly knocking him over. He carried her to his horse, shielding her with his own body as the storm roared around them. He didn't know who she was, where she had come from, or why she was out here alone. But he knew trouble when he saw her tanned. Everything about her smelled of danger. An hour later, when he reached the shelter of an abandoned line shack, he laid her on a cot and gave her another drink. She finally found her voice weak, trembling, but filled with warning. They're coming. You shouldn't have helped me, she whispered. You don't know what price you just agreed to pay. Outside. Horses thundered across the storm-lit horizon. The price for saving her life had already arrived. The first hoofbeats were distant, just a dull rhythm buried beneath the storm's roar. But Cole Maddox had lived long enough on the frontier to know the difference between thunder and men on horseback. The woman on the cot flinched at the sound, her fingers clutching the blanket as if it could stop what was coming for her. Cole stood slowly, brushing the dust from his coat, his jaw tightening with that old familiar weight he hadn't felt in years, the knowledge that tonight, whether he chose it or not, he was stepping back into a kind of trouble most men didn't walk away from. The shack trembled as the wind slammed into the wooden walls, rattling the roof. A lantern swung from a nail near the door, casting long shadows across the room. Cole checked his rifle, running a thumb over a deep scratch in the stock, a scar older than some towns in the territory. He holstered it, then looked down at the woman, her eyes wide, her breathing fast, her entire body shaking with a fear that ran deeper than the storm outside. Who's Kuman? He asked quietly. She opened her mouth, but the answer seemed to freeze in her throat. Instead of speaking, she reached for his sleeve, gripping it with surprising strength. You shouldn't have helped me, she whispered again. They don't let go of what they think they own. Cole felt something cold move up his spine. Not fear, the kind that had kept him alive through ambushes, cattle raids, and one winter so deadly it took half the valley with it. He could smell the danger in this story, could feel its shape even before he heard its name. But he didn't push her, not yet. Outside, the hoofbeats grew louder. 5, maybe 6 riders. Heavy horses, fast. He stepped to the window, lifting the curtain just enough to see the storm-slashed horizon. Lightning ripped across the sky, illuminating silhouettes, dark coats, wide hats, rifles gleaming in the flash. They weren't looking for shelter. They were hunting. Behind him, the woman forced herself upright, leaning against the wall as she gathered enough air to speak. "They're called the Black Spur Riders," she said. "They run the southern trails. They take what they want, and they don't forgive theft." Her voice cracked, but she pushed on. "I wasn't supposed to escape, and I wasn't supposed to survive the desert." Cole turned toward her, studying her face. Dust-caked lashes, lips cracked from thirst, a bruise on her collarbone shaped like fingers hard, violent fingers. His jaw clenched. He'd seen women marked like that before, and he knew exactly what kind of men did it. Before he could ask another question, a voice cut through the storm sharp, echoing across the canyon like a knife scraping steel. "We know you're in there." The woman curled into herself, shaking. Cole moved to her side, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Leela," she breathed. "Well, Lila," he said as he stood and reached for his hat. "I reckon the storm's not the worst thing knocking on this door tonight." Outside, another bolt of lightning ripped the sky, and in that white flash, Cole saw the riders dismounting, spreading out. Guns drawn, he took a slow breath. A man only pays the price once he knows what he's buying. And tonight, without meaning to, he had purchased a war. The wind hammered the shack hard enough to shake dust from the rafters, and for a moment the storm and the silence between the hoofbeats felt like they were holding their breath together. Cole Maddox stepped away from the window, the floor creaking under the weight of a decision he'd already made the moment he'd lifted Leela from the sand. He didn't know her story. He didn't know what chains she'd broken or how far she'd run, but he knew the look of a hunted soul, and the West had its own language for that. A man didn't need names or details to understand when someone was fleeing a monster who believed the world belonged to him. And Cole had spent too much of his life watching monsters operate to ever hand someone back to them. He moved to the table against the wall, pulling open a drawer filled with old tools, spare cartridges, and a tiny box he rarely touched. His fingers brushed the lid, hesitating because opening that box meant becoming the man he'd tried so hard to bury. He exhaled, slow and quiet, then flipped it open. Inside lay a small metal badge, tarnished by years of dust but still sharp enough to cut through the shadows. The star of a U.S. Deputy Marshal. Leela saw it from the cot, her eyes widening, not with hope, but with confusion. Cole didn't put it on. He just stared at it a moment longer, then shut the box and tucked it into his coat. That life was dead, but sometimes the dead had to rise because the living refused to stop their sins. Another shout split the storm closer this time, angry enough to rattle the boards. "Last chance, cowboy. Send her out." Leela covered her ears, curling inward as if those words alone could drag her back into the cage she had escaped. Cole's boots thudded softly as he crossed the room. He knelt beside her, lifting her chin gently. "Listen to me," he said, voice steady as iron. "I ain't giving you back. Not to them. Not to anyone." Her breath trembled as tears filled her eyes, but she shook her head fiercely. "You don't understand," she whispered. "If you fight them, they'll burn everything you've ever cared about. They don't just kill people, they erase them." Cole gave a small, humorless smile. "Darlin', they can try." Lightning flashed again, revealing silhouettes creeping toward the shack, their coats flapping wild in the storm. The riders moved like wolves closing in on a wounded deer, spreading out, aiming to corner their prey. Cole stood slowly, every muscle settling into a calm readiness that only old gunfighters ever learned. He checked the rifle one last time, loaded 6 shells into the revolver on his hip, and blew dust off the barrel like a man greeting an old friend he hoped he wouldn't need but always trusted. He turned off the lantern. Darkness swallowed the shack outside. The riders muttered. They weren't expecting calm. They weren't expecting silence. They expected fear. Cole stepped to the door, placing one hand on the wood. He heard the sound of boots crunching gravel. Someone approaching slow, deliberate. The leader, the one who wanted to talk before he killed. Cole listened to the footsteps, counting each one, measuring the distance, the weight, the confidence. A fist slammed against the door. "You've got 3 seconds to hand her over, Rancher. After that, we take her. Anything left of you?" Cole didn't answer. He simply curled his fingers around the door handle. Behind him, Leela trembled so hard the cot shook. She covered her mouth, trying not to make a sound. She had run far, but she knew exactly how far cruelty could reach. And tonight, the storm wasn't the only thing with claws. Cole breathed in slow, steady. Cold, the price was coming due. He opened the door. The door swung open with a slow wooden groan, letting the storm crash into the shack like an angry spirit. Wind tore through Cole's coat, rain stung his face, and thunder cracked so close it felt like the sky itself had split open. But none of that mattered, not compared to the man standing a few paces ahead, framed in lightning like a devil carved out of the storm. The leader of the Black Spur Riders. Broad shoulders, a black coat dripping with rain, a hat pulled low enough to hide his eyes until another flash lit the night and revealed something colder than the weather in his stare. A jagged scar ran from his temple to the corner of his jaw, twisting his smile into something cruel and permanent. 2 riders flanked him, rifles aimed at Cole's chest. 3 more moved behind the horses, tightening the noose around the shack. They expected a frightened rancher, someone who'd fold the moment he saw real guns, real killers. Cole Maddox didn't blink. The leader stepped forward, boots sinking into the mud. "Evening," he drawled, voice smooth as rattlesnake venom. "Storm's a real mean one. Shame you decided to make your last night on Earth in a place like this." His grin widened. "Now, where's the girl?" Cole rested one hand casually against the doorframe, the other hanging loose near his revolver, as if it belonged there, and it did. "You'll need to be more specific," he replied calmly. "Storm blew in a lot of trouble tonight." The leader chuckled a low, dead sound. "You think you're funny, cowboy?" He leaned in close, eyes narrowing. "That girl you're hiding, she's been claimed. Belongs to the Spur now. She ran, sure, but everything that runs eventually stops." He touched the hilt of the knife on his belt. "We're here to take her back, one way or another." Cole's jaw tightened just enough to show he'd heard what he needed to hear. Belongs, claimed, taken. The language of wolves who thought themselves kings. He'd dealt with men like this before long ago, on a different frontier, under a different oath. And he'd buried more than a few. A gust of wind tore across the ground. Lifting dust and rain, Cole spoke through it. Low and steady, "She's not going anywhere with you." Silence. Then the leader's expression twisted, the smile fading into something sharp and dangerous. "You just bought yourself a grave, Rancher." Another flash of lightning split the sky, and in that brief burst of white, Cole saw movement at the corners of his vision. 2 riders, shifting. One, lifting a rifle. Another, stepping toward the window where Lila hid behind the shadows. Everything happened in a heartbeat. Cole's hand moved before thought could catch up. His revolver cleared leather. Thunder cracked overhead and gunfire followed it like an echo. The first rider dropped into the mud, his rifle spinning from his hand. The second stumbled back, clutching his shoulder as blood spilled between his fingers. The leader didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled a wide, awful grin that meant what came next wasn't going to be over quickly. Inside the shack, Leela gasped as bullets slammed into the walls behind her, splintering wood, filling the air with smoke and dust. She ducked low, crawling behind a crate, hands trembling so badly she could barely hold her breath steady. Outside, Cole stepped away from the door, boots planted firm in the mud, revolver smoking in his hand. The storm whipped his coat like wings, lightning painting him in fierce white light. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The riders reloaded. The leader lowered his head like a bull preparing to charge. Kill him, he snapped. 6 rifles raised. Cole exhaled one slow. Quiet, ready. This was the price, and he was about to pay it in full.